If you're struggling to learn a new language and you're starting to think that it's too difficult, or maybe that it's just something that is not for you, I'm here as living proof that is not the case. In fact, I struggled basically half of my life just to learn my second language, that is English. And during all my school curricula, I was basically the worst in my class in learning English. And now I ended up speaking 4 languages, of course a different level of fluency. And about this topic, I know that there is a lot of discussion when there are some people claiming to be polyglot, speaking so many languages. This person can only carry on a basic conversation, but in my opinion, a language is done to communicate with people. So as long as you are able to use that language, even with very basic vocabulary, but being able to carry on a conversation with maybe native speakers and communicate what you want to communicate, I think it can be considered already a kind of level of fluency. For instance, my English is not perfect, I know about this, but I'm able to understand, I'm able to speak, and I'm living in another country, in a company where I have to use English as my daily conversation, and I'm able to carry on my work, communicate with my colleagues. So even though my accent, for instance, is not perfect, it's good enough to serve the function of communicating. So now enough with the disclaimer, and I will try to explain how I ended up speaking the specific language, and I will try to speak directly in that language just because I think it's a fun format to try, and also so I can use it as a practice in trying to speak the specific language. Partendo dall'italiano non c'è molto da dire, è la mia lingua nativa. Infatti sono nato in Italia, a Verona, e ho fatto tutto il mio percorso di studi in Italia, dove ho anche iniziato a lavorare prima di trasferirmi in Francia. Forse una cosa curiosa che si può dire è che perfino gli italiani non capiscono il mio accento da dove provenga, perché infatti nelle diverse regioni italiane ci sono diversi accenti ed è facilmente riconoscibile spesso una persona da quale città viene o almeno da quale regione. Questo probabilmente è dovuto anche alla presenza di diversi dialetti in ciascuna regione, ma anche a livello di città o di provincia. Ma io in realtà non ho mai imparato il mio dialetto locale di Verona, posso capire alcune parole quando le persone lo parlano, ma in realtà ho sempre parlato italiano anche in casa con la mia famiglia, quindi probabilmente non ho mai preso un accento specifico per questa ragione. E poi avendo studiato anche a Milano, poi in contesti comunque con colleghi da ovunque, ho preso forse un mix di accenti anche da questo. More interesting probably is my story of how I ended up learning English. That is actually a mandatory language learning during the whole curricula in Italy, in the schools. But even in that case, honestly, the English lessons in the Italian schools are very, very, very awful. You often have teachers that they are not really good at speaking English. I remember one teacher that basically didn't even know all the grammar rules, and when somebody was posing a question, she was asking our best student in the class to answer for her because she didn't even know. And often they're not even speaking English during the classroom. Basically, they explain you the grammar in Italian, and that's it. Basically, you have to learn on your own, and it's not really a good way to learn a language, in my opinion. Even though it's helpful to stick at studying grammar when you have like an exam to prepare or something, you are forced of studying the hard part of the language. At some point it will enter in your head and you will learn the rule, even though maybe you don't really like doing so. But I mean, I think there are better ways to learn the language. Indeed, in my personal opinion, when I started to really speak English, that was basically during high school, when I decided to put it as a goal of my own, so not something imposed by the school, but something that I really want to do for myself. I started to put more focus in it, and I was more motivated because it was an internal motivation in learning the language that pushed me to try to learn it. And what really helped me is to be immersed in the language. That means consume content in the language, starting from books, or maybe listening to music in that language by also reading the lyrics and trying to understand what they're saying. In that way, you're also practicing listening to the language, but in a fun way, and also the music help you to remember some lyrics, remember some words, and you can start to remember even phrases just having fun listening to music, and that's great. And as well, it helped me a lot to watch a lot of TV series and movies in English with English subtitles. And actually, this experience is what led me to learn in this way also the other languages that I speak. But also during high school, I was lucky enough that my parents sent me for a summer school, 1 year in the UK and 1 year for 2 weeks in Boston in the US. And this forced me to really use the language in a different context, different environment where I was basically forced to speak English. And this really pushed me to use the language in a way that in Italy I would have never done, finding the inner strength to force myself to speak the language. And as well, during high school, my big achievement was that in the end I managed to get the first certificate in English, FCE. And after that, during my university, I kept using English in my daily life, basically by reading articles in English, watching movies in English. And in the end, when I finished university, I managed to reach the C1 level in English by taking the IELTS exam, where I got a score of 7.5. So basically, this was my biggest achievement concerning language learning. Even though I think that language certificates are useful for some things, like if you want to apply for a university or in some places where they require you to have a certificate, but they're not really the goal when you need to learn a new language. But I think we need a dedicated video about the language certificates because there is a lot to talk about this. But now let's move on to my third language, qui est le français. Et mon accent c'est terrible, je suis pas bon à l'écrire. Mais je suis capable de faire une conversation en français. Je l'utilise pour communiquer avec les techniciens quand j'ai eu des problèmes dans l'Amazon. Mais normalement, je n'utilise pas beaucoup parce que, comme je dis, dans l'entreprise où je travaille, nous parlons en anglais. Donc, je n'ai pas beaucoup d'occasion pour pratiquer à parler en français. Mais maintenant, j'habite en France, donc quand je vais aller au supermarché ou je dois faire des pratiques bureaucratiques, je dois parler en français parce que beaucoup de personnes ici ne parlent pas anglais. Donc il n'y a pas de choix. Si vous voulez communiquer avec cette personne, vous devez parler en français. Donc la chose c'est que le français c'est très similaire à l'italien, donc pour moi c'est facile de le comprendre quand il est écrit. Donc je n'ai pas de problème à le lire, mais il y a des difficultés pour moi à le parler et aussi quand je dois l'écrire c'est complètement différent. C'est très difficile pour moi de souvenir comment écrire des mots, donc j'ai besoin encore de beaucoup de pratique pour le parler bien. Moi, je pense que la bonne stratégie pour moi, c'est de regarder des films ou des vidéos sur YouTube en français pour faire pratique, de l'écouter et aussi d'apprendre des nouveaux mots et des nouveaux vocabulaires en général. Okay, speaking in French was already too difficult for me, but now let's move to my last language that I can say I can communicate with, that is bahasa Indonesia. Aku bisa berbicara sedikit bahasa Indonesia karena pacarku orang Indonesia dan aku mau berbicara dengan keluarga dia dan aku sudah berbicara dengan bapak dia kapan aku di Yogyakarta, di mana keluarga dia tinggal sekarang. Dan untuk belajar bahasa Indonesia lebih sulit daripada belajar bahasa dari Eropa karena tidak ada banyak resource online untuk itu. Dan untuk berbicara itu aku mulai dengan guru, dengan platform italki, dan dengan dia aku mulai berbicara dengan orang yang lain dan itu lebih bagus untuk mulai berlatih bahasa ini. Dan juga aku coba berbicara sekarang dengan pacarku juga. Dan juga ini bahasa yang aku suka banget. Dan aku tahu yang aku ke Indonesia di future juga. Tadi aku akan berbicara itu dengan native speaker dan aku pikir bahasa ini sangat useful untukku. Okay, now it's been difficult to switch between all the languages, it's very tiring, but I don't even know what else to say about this. But if you have questions, please leave a comment and I will try to answer you with specific tips if you want. There are other languages that I tried to speak in the past, at least try to learn the basics. For instance, during university I was playing a lot a game called Counter-Strike, where there were so many Russians every time, so I was curious about it and I started to learn the alphabet and few words, but I gave up pretty fast because it's a very difficult language to learn and I was not motivated enough. And I think this is one of the keys to stick with the language, is to be very motivated, having a reason and liking the language. For instance, wanted to learn a language just because it's useful, but you don't really like it, you're not even sure you're gonna use it in your everyday life, it's gonna be very difficult for you to stick with it. While if it is a language that you're passionate about, you're happy to listen to the music in that language, you want to watch the movies in that language, that this is bring you so much further in the language learning journey. Now, another language that I would like to learn in the future is probably Japanese, because I love Japan. I've been there already twice and I love the language, how it sounds. Maybe I'm not really a big fan of the writing system that is so complex and you need to learn so many kanji characters and there are so many things to learn, but I think it's a very fun language to study as well. And I already did in the past. I managed to learn at least the hiragana and katakana, and it has been useful for me also while traveling in Japan, because I could recognize at least some of the words, and I actually managed to say a few words when I was, for instance, eating at the restaurant, and it's already a good experience, I think. So let me know which languages are you currently studying, what languages you would like to study, which ones you think are easier or more difficult for you to learn. And thank you for watching till the end, and see you in the next video.